What's up everybody, welcome back. So in this video I want to introduce my CurvePlayer tool that I've been working on. You see it in the background over here, and first of all let me give a little bit of introduction to what this actually is. So if you're a little bit familiar with my channel, you probably know the FPS animation tutorial that I've been working on. And in there we added a socket to our weapon and we moved that socket around, and using some IK bones in the animation blueprint we actually create ADS animations, recoil and weapon sway, things like that on the fly. And I've been thinking about it, and I wanted to make a system where I could manipulate that same joint to create animations, and I used curves to do that. So what you see here is the result of the tutorial that I've been talking about. So the ADS animation and the recoil and things like that are created by moving around a socket on the weapon. So there's no actual animations in Blender involved here. And we are going to use the same method to make raise lower animations, walking animations and things like that. And I've created the CurvePlayer tool to make things a lot easier to do. So if you want to know more about that system I've been talking about, you should check out this video. I'm gonna link it at the top right corner of the screen. So in here we set up the bone to manipulate the skeleton, and we create the IK bones. So this kinda explains how the system works. So if you're interested in that, you should check out this video. And then we also have playlist over here where you have some default Blender stuff that you might need if you want to follow this tutorial, or if you want to create your own curve animations. So you probably need the first 3 videos in here to create a base pose for your weapon, and once you have a base pose you can use the CurvePlayer tool to make other animations. So in this video I'm going to show what the CurvePlayer can do and how you can use it, and I'm going to upload a new series of videos where I set up a character to actually use the curve animations you created. So this is a project I have been working on, and this is kind of the result. So all of these animations are only curves. So the BlendSpace you see here is curve driven. We have a walk animation that is curve driven. The fire animation is curve driven, and we have a lower and raise animation that's also curve driven. And as you can see, we have 3 different weapons in here, but they actually all use the same curve animations. So that's one of the benefits of this animation setup. You can actually use all of the animations for all of the weapons you want. They are not related to the skeleton, since they only manipulate one bone. So that's one of the advantages. So yeah, this is something I'm gonna show later in a more expanded tutorial, how to set up a character for this. First I'm gonna start on just showing how to make the actual animations and how to use the CurvePlayer. So let's get started right away. So what do we need to actually work with the CurvePlayer? So in this video I'm just gonna go over it for the people that are a little bit familiar with the setup and might already have a character because they followed my previous tutorial. Don't worry, I will be making tutorial videos specifically for the CurvePlayer and to create an animation blueprint that works with curve animations and things like that later on. So this is just a quick little overview video, and if you want to get a head start and mess around with it yourself, this shows you what you need to get things working. So if you want to get a head start, you might want to follow this tutorial series, and specifically the first 3 videos. There you can create a base pose. You need a base pose created in Blender to start working with curve animations. And you might want to follow part 9 of the series as well, and this is where we set up the aim socket and explain the IK driven animation blueprint. So those are the most important videos if you want to go and investigate yourself. So what do we need for the CurvePlayer to work? We need a weapon that has an aim socket added to it. So over here we can add sockets. We should have a socket named aim socket with capital S and a capital A, and this is the actual bone that we manipulate with the curves. So we should have that. and then we should also have pose animations. So I mentioned previously, we can make those in Blender. Follow the tutorial that I just showed, and we have some base poses for the weapons, and from this we can start working. So once you have that requirements met and you have the CurvePlayer installed, and I'm gonna release it on the gamedev raw Discord soon probably, so if you want to get it, make sure you check out the Discord or keep an eye on the channel. And then we can start working with our curve animations, so let's do it. So this is the CurvePlayer project as you downloaded from the Discord server, and in this video I'm going to work with it with the mannequin skeleton, and I'm going to release a video as well on how to replace the actual mesh for your character if you want to work with a custom mesh. But pretty much all you need to do is change the mesh over here in the CurvePlayer character blueprint, and then you need to retarget the CurvePlayer animation blueprint to your own skeleton and assign that to the mesh over here, and then you should be good to go to use it with your own custom character. But if you do not get it working, I will make a video for that later as well. So I'm gonna create shotgun animations for the mannequin over here, and I already have a pose animation. So first of all, I'm gonna go to the CurvePlayer folder and open the animation blueprint, and we need to make sure that we plug in the pose animation that we want to work with into the beginning of the chain over here. So I'm gonna plug in the shotgun pose animation, and then the next thing I need to do is make sure that we have the correct weapon on our character. So I'm gonna select the first person weapon and I'm gonna assign the shotgun. So this is parented to the weapon grip socket or bone that we created in Blender, so that's the correct socket. Make sure that's correct. And this weapon has an aim socket, so this works. And now we see that the CurvePlayer is added as a child blueprint over here. If we select it on the right side, we can add curves to it. So we want to assign the curves to it that we want to work with. So for example, I already have some curves in this folder. So let's say I want to work with the lower animations. So for each animation we have two curves. We have a rotation curve that drives the rotation of the aim socket, and we also have a translation curve that drives the translation of the aim socket, and both of these curves together make the animation. So let's say I want to work with the lower curves, then I'm going to select the CurvePlayer over here, and we have translation curves. So I'm going to add an array element, and I'm also going to add a rotation curve. So for now you can ignore float curves. I removed the option for that. I didn't really find any useful uses for it, so just ignore the float curves for now. So I'm going to add the translation lower curve, and I'm going to add the rotation lower curve over here, and then these curves will appear in the CurvePlayer for me to work with. So I could just add all of them over here at once, and then I can simply select them in the CurvePlayer as well. So we have the character setup, we have the weapon setup, and we have the curves setup. So right now, if I just start the project, we should have something to work with. So it will open up like this, and let's see if the curves are added first. So if we go to the animation tracks over here, we can select 2 tracks, so we can work on 2 animations at the same time. So in the first track we can select the translation curve for our lower animation, and we can select the rotation curve in here as well. So we added them correctly, that works. And once we added them, we can start working with the curves to make animations. So let me just go over the entire UI and just explain what everything does from here. So first up are the animation tracks. So we can work on 2 animations at the same time. So I added 2 tracks. It's just for convenience, so you don't have to keep switching all the time. And we also have 2 playback sliders over here, and all of the playback options. So if we have a curve selected over here, you can see the playback length of the curve, and the playback length of the CurvePlayer is set at 5 seconds by default. So we can use these buttons to actually assign the correct length. So if I want to assign this length to track 1, I can press the 1 button and this will assign the length. If I press 2, it will do it for track 2. And if I press the big button, it will put both tracks to that playback length. So that's how these buttons work. And we have a reload button over here. So if I'm editing the curve and I actually change the length, then I want to reload it over here. So all of the changes are reflected in the CurvePlayer. Then we can simply drag the slider over here to play our animation. And we can also use the playback button, so we can play both tracks at the same time, or stop both tracks at the same time, or play them from start at the same time. So the big buttons use both tracks at the same time, or we can play them track 1 separately or track 2 separate, and we can set them to loop or not loop. So that's how the playback buttons work. So we can loop track 1 and it will loop the animation just like that. We can also apply the time scale if we want. So if we want to play it in slow motion, for example, we can do that. And then we can also drag all of these buttons over here. So you can simply drag them from left to right with your mouse, or you can enter the values manually. So that's whatever you prefer. So those are the translation and rotation tracks in the animation folder. So let me see if I would go back to the CurvePlayer character over here. So pretty much I can assign all of the curves that I want to work with at the same time, and I can simply select the ones in the CurvePlayer. So that would make things So I think we have pretty much all of the curves added, so I can show everything a bit quicker. So as you can see, all of the available curves show up in the correct rotation or translation section. So if I want to look at the sway curve, for example, I can select it over here, assign the length to track 1 and play it. And it's playing a little sway animation over here. So we have alpha values we can control on the right side, and we can control the ADS alpha, for example. So we can also see what our animation look like in ADS. And we can also set the alpha for the animation tracks themselves. So if I set it back to 0, the animation is gone because alpha is 0. So you can mess around with things like that as well. And I think we are pretty much done with the translation track explanation. So let's go into the BlendSpaces. So let me stop the animation over here. We have a BlendSpace setup as well, and we can set up directional BlendSpaces for moving left, right, back, forward, and we have a turning and looking BlendSpace, so looking left to right and looking up and down. So if I set my BlendSpace in here, we have a direction BlendSpace, turn and rotation. So I can mess around with the BlendSpace values over here to see what it looks like. So if I have a direction of 90, I'm moving to the right. So you can see this is my BlendSpace animation for moving right. And then 180 is backwards, minus 90 is left, and minus 180 is backwards again. So you can play around with your direction BlendSpace in here, and you can create this with a curve as well, and I'm going to show you in another video how to do it. And then you can do the same with turning and looking, and you don't have to specifically use both tracks, so you could also use just a rotation track for looking, for example. So if I have a turn rotation over here, and then if I move right, you can see the gun moves right. And if I look left and look right, the gun rotates in the proper direction. So all of these are curve driven as well. And you have the look BlendSpace, so you can also look up and down. And you can combine all of these settings and put them in ADS and then play your animation. So you can mess around with all of this stuff to see how it works and how everything looks at the same time and all of that stuff. So it's a pretty decent setup, I think. I worked with it a little bit and I think all of the options are here. If you think something is missing, you can obviously just report it in the Discord and I'll try and add some options to it if needed. So we have BlendSpace setup covered as well. Let's move on to the recoil settings. So I've also added a section where you can mess around with your procedural recoil settings and you can see how they look, and you can also combine them with any curve animation if you want to. So for example, you can make a curve animation to fire your weapon, and then you can add procedural recoil to that curve. And you can combine all of the settings in here and mess around with them to see how it's going to look in game. So I'm going to ignore the curve in here for now, and I'm just going to display the procedural recoil settings. So over here we can set the fire time for our weapon. So let's say for a shotgun that's something like 0.15 seconds. The recoil time is how much of the time the recoil is going to be applied. So let's say 0.1 second, and then the last 0.05 seconds it's going to center back to 0 again. We have interpolation speeds we can set over here. We're not going to mess around with it too much. And then over here we can set the translation and rotation for the recoil. So for example, if I want my weapon to move up, then I would want to increase the Z value. So let's say minimal of 1.4 and a maximum of 3. And then if I press the fire weapon button over here, you can see the gun moves up. And then I could also select auto fire and enable firing, so you could, for example, test an automatic weapon. And over here then you could also obviously add other settings. So if I want the gun to move backwards, you want to use the -Y. So for example, -5 to -3, why not? So you can see the gun is jumping around now because it's using random values in between these set values over here. So you can have a procedural generated recoil, and you could also add clamps to it. And you see if I enable the clamps and they are all set to 0, there's no recoil again. So you can maximize the recoil by setting the clamps over here. Yeah, obviously you can make this look a lot better by messing around with a lot of the settings. So that's not the point of this video. This is just showing what it can do. So you can also play around with the recoil alpha over here. You can toggle your crosshair, and obviously you could also go into ADS to see how that looks, and if you want to reduce the alpha maybe, or if you want to use completely different settings or things like that. So you can mess around with all of this stuff over here. Now this doesn't actually save, so if you want to use this, then you could print all of the values to your log. So over here we have print buttons. So for example, I can print the recoil to my log, and then if I go to the window developer tools output log, then you can see over here there is a section with all of the settings printed that we used over here in the CurvePlayer. So we can simply copy and paste them into a document, and then we can use them later on in our project. So that's how you want to use the recoil settings and the recoil generator over here. Let me see. So what else can we do? Let me talk a little bit about the joint targets. So let me stop the firing over here. So over here you can see joint target locations. So if you start the CurvePlayer in the viewport, you can actually eject, and then you can look around and you can see the joint targets over here. So if you move these around, you can see the direction of the elbow is changing. So you can actually play around with these settings and figure out the best setting for you, and then you can print them to your log so you can use them later on. But I have also added the option for joint target tracks, and then you can create curve tracks for the left and the right joint target, and you can actually animate them. So if you want to make a bit more complicated animations where you also might want to animate the joint targets, then that's possible as well. And as you can see, everything works in the ejected view as well. So I could see how this would look from outside, for example, if I would want to. And I could mess around with everything still with the pawn ejected. So that works as well. And we can go back to possess, and then we are back in the CurvePlayer again. So I think we pretty much covered all of the settings. We also have a save load setting, so we can save all of the settings and animation tracks and everything to some slots, so you don't have to reload everything if you want to continue working with it later on. So just for a little convenience. So if you wanted to load actually curves into the correct slots, you have to make sure that those curves are loaded to the CurvePlayer in the character, otherwise it won't be able to load them, obviously. So but that will all make sense once you start using it, I hope. So I think I covered pretty much everything. I'm gonna try and release this project as soon as possible on the Discord, so if you want to get a hand of this project and mess around with it yourself, please join the gamedev Discord server and you can get it for free over there. And if you like the channel, please make sure to drop a like or follow it, so that helps out tremendously. So let me give a little bit of an example. So if I have the animation curves over here, and I can grab my lower rotation curve and also my lower translation curve. So that's this one. Now with the CurvePlayer open, and this is a little bit messy because I have to do this at one monitor, but we can actually edit the curves over here, and because we have the CurvePlayer, we can see at what time we are. So if we have a little hiccup in the animation, we can simply drag the timeline to that, we can see the time, and then we can go back into our curves and adjust it. So this makes working with curves a whole lot easier. If you create curve animations and you just have to guess how it looks and then go in game, check it out, go back, you can't find the exact time where the hiccup is, for example, things like that. So this is where the CurvePlayer comes in handy, and it's just making your life easier, I hope. So this is the lower curve over here. So this takes 0.6 seconds. So right now I'm at 0.2, and if I would move this around, so this is the translation Z that's moving it down. So I'm gonna put it over here, and you see as soon as I move the slider, it will adjust to the new curve settings and the animation is completely changed. So you can create curves and animations by having the curve window open at one side and then mess around with the CurvePlayer in the other window. So that's how it's intended to use. So more tutorials on how to actually set up a character and create animations and blend spaces with this tool will be coming soon. So thanks for watching, everybody. Talk to you later.